Hi, my name is Lindsay Weirich, and you're listening to the Frugal Crafter podcast, where today we're going to talk about the cycle of precious. So, I brought this up in my last Sat Chat over on my YouTube channel, and a bunch of you guys said that you'd really love to hear a podcast episode on this topic. And I really wanted to delve a little deeper in this myself. So this came about because I was reading a article the other day, and it was talking about how the longer we keep things, the less likely we are to use them. And there was a study done, and I probably should reread the article before I do the podcast, but the general gist of it was that the longer participants in the study owned a product, the less likely they were to use it because it became kind of special and they didn't want to waste it, or no event seemed to be special enough to use the product or to use the item. And the lady that wrote the article had talked about a blouse that she purchased that was really cute, and she had a date that night and she decided not to wear it. It just wasn't a special enough occasion. And then a few other occurrences that she had that she could use a lovely blouse to wear, they didn't seem special enough either. And the longer she held on to that blouse, the more special it became. And then nothing seemed worthy of wearing it until finally, a couple years later, she ended up donating the blouse, tag still on it, because she never wore it. Now, that just seems like such a shame to me. And yet I can completely identify with this. For instance, my husband and I received a beautiful bottle of champagne on our wedding day. And we originally thought, oh, we can't just open it. We'll have to save it for our anniversary because the bottle was hand painted. It was just this gorgeous champagne. It was very expensive. It came with some matching champagne flutes that were also hand painted. But our year anniversary came, and I was like, well, geez, maybe. And then 1 year turned to 5 years, turned to 10 years. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary, and we thought, you know what, we really ought to open that champagne. And so we Googled online how long champagne lasts, and it turns out that champagne really only lasts a couple of years. So it's still sitting there unopened. The bottle is so pretty, but we just know it's going to be disappointing when we open it. Um, and I think a lot of things in our life has that same fate, like candles that melt in storage that were too pretty to use, or china plates that sit in the china cabinet instead of actually being on our table and being enjoyed. I heard so many instances in the comments from my YouTube video, people saying, yes, my beautiful hand crocheted tablecloth that turned yellow in my hope chest because it was never special enough to wear it. We were afraid we were going to stain it or ruin it if we took it out. There's so many different examples of that. And I think if you think in your life, think of those things that you put away for best and never actually used. Now, think about your art supplies and your craft supplies. I mentioned on the YouTube video that I had this gorgeous sheet of rusty pickle scrapbook paper that I purchased in Augusta. I bought a single sheet and it was kind of expensive. And that company has gone out of business. You can't buy that paper, even if you wanted to. And I bought that when my son was probably about a year old and he had just turned 19. So that paper has been sitting in the special folder in my craft room untouched for all of these years because I couldn't find a project that was special enough. It was too unique to be used as a backing paper for a scrapbook layout. It had all these interesting little like fruit crate labels on it. And I thought about cutting it up and then decoupaging it on some boxes. Oh, but I didn't have the right boxes. Oh, those boxes aren't special enough. And on it went. And that paper still sits in my stash. And I have paper from Graphic 45. And if you're a scrapbooker or a card maker, you know how special and precious that paper is because it gets discontinued and then you can't find it anymore. I have some of the Flower Fairies paper, which if you're a paper aficionado, you're probably drooling over, that I have used parts of it, but it's definitely got to be a special project if I'm going to cut something out of that paper and glue it on. So why are we like that? Why do our products become so special that we can't use it? Think about paint. Paint can go dry in the tube and be ruined before we get a chance to use it. So that should be reason enough to squeeze out those acrylic paints and give it a try. Even if your painting doesn't come out good, well, then I'd waste the canvas. Well, canvases can be painted over, or you can even take the canvas off the stretcher and you can just purchase plain cotton duct and, staple it on there and prime it and reuse the stretchers. So we shouldn't let that be a barrier. I know sometimes we think, well, what if I can't replace it? What if I don't have the money to replace it? If I if I use it up. If I use it up, then I don't have it anymore. But chances are, say it's watercolors, you use up one color, you can go buy a tube of that color and refill it. You can repurchase the paints. Generally, you're not going to repurchase all 48 colors. If you bought a big tin of watercolors, you could purchase that one color or two colors that you've used up. And it's really not that big of an expense. I think we compare the expense of buying it all to just replacing one thing we've used up. For instance, if you purchased the most expensive of beautiful color pencils, maybe the Derwent Lightfast or the Caran d'Ache Luminance, and you paid hundreds of dollars for that set, you're probably feeling a little bit like, well, I really ought to save it until I'm working on that important artwork that needs to last 100 years. But honestly, pencils are slow wearing, so even if you had to replace a pencil at full price, that would be $4, and generally, sometimes you can wait. If you're patient, you can wait and look, we'll have them on sale for half off, so that would be $2. But do you know how much coloring and drawing you have to do to use up a pencil? It takes some time. And the ironic thing is that we'll treat our budget products a little bit more carefree like, and I do it. I'm so guilty of this. I will get a set of new cheap pencils because I'm curious about them, and I will have a ball using them, and I'll be sharpening them. Don't worry about sharpening them because it's an inexpensive set. But honestly, if I used up a pencil and I really love that color and I wanted to get that color again from that brand, I'd have to buy a whole new set, which would be like 30 bucks. So that $4, really nice light fast pencil doesn't seem so expensive when you compare. A lot of times I think we think of that initial like full purchase price of a whole set, and we don't consider that actually in the long run the better pencils are probably more frugal and more cost effective. But breaking into them though can really stress us out because we're worried about using our precious things. Precious watercolor paper, if your watercolor paper isn't stored right, it can go bad very quickly. If you're storing your watercolor paper in a damp environment or an environment where the humidity and temperature fluctuates, you're going to be lessening the lifespan of that paper. Now, paper can last for decades, but it has to be stored properly. I keep all my full sheet expensive papers in a flat file under my bed where the temperature stays constant and the humidity stays constant year round. I don't store them in my basement where most of my smaller pads of paper that I use up more quickly are stored. And even then, I've had paper go bad, not upstairs, but I've had like a block of cheaper cellulose paper have the sizing go off because I didn't use it up because it was kind of precious. So I was kind of saving it for, not my practice work, not my best work, but that work in the middle. And the other thing is, guys, and I know we're not all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this, but you probably aren't, or not as guilty as I am, is um, being more ambitious with what we buy than being realistic in what we actually consume. So, for instance, if you're stocking up, and if you could see me, I'm doing air quotes, if you're stocking up, and the reason I say stocking up, because that's what the marketers love to tell us when they're running a good sale, you better stock up. These are stock up prices. There's a craft chain Joann's, they'll have like stock up sales. I don't hear stock up as much during the pandemic, I think because the stock has been low, but they would run something at almost at cost and they would say, come in and stock up. And we would do that. We would go in and we'd stock up because boy, that price is so good. We're not going to see that price again. We better stock up now because in the future we might not have the money or the price might go up and we wouldn't be able to afford it or whatever. So we go and we stock up on our paper and we stock up on our yarn and we stock up on our fabric. And then it occurs to us it occurs to me anyway, that I cannot create at the level that I purchase. It is much easier to purchase at a higher volume than we can output by using those supplies. So there's another reason why we shouldn't treat our supplies as that precious because chances are we have more than we can use in a lifetime. Now, of course, I'm speaking generally, not of everybody. Some people are very disciplined, but with all the fun stuff that comes out, we're creative people and maybe we go to a yard sale and we find like a big bin of paper or yarn or stamps or fabric and we get inspired. We know we can turn someone's trash into our treasures. And that's fine and that's great. It's so much better than it just going to a landfill. But if we're not using it because it's become precious because we've held on to it for too long, then that's a tragedy. It really is. I really have curtailed what I purchase in the last couple of years. I did a big KonMari clean out about 4 or 5 years ago. There's a video of it on my YouTube channel if you're curious. Things had gotten really out of hand. I'd fallen into the trap of, and this is probably why my YouTube channel has declined a bit since then. I fell into the trap of doing haul videos on YouTube because they do very well. They get a lot of views. YouTube promotes them and they put a lot of ads on haul videos and higher paying ads. And I always love to find the steals. I love to find the steal of a deals. I would go into AC Moore and they would have awesome clearances and I would find some really fantastic things, or Joanne or Jerry's Autorama online sales. And I would snap them up. I'd snap up these deals. A lot of times it was like below cost that I was finding these things, and I got excited about finding them and buying them and sharing them. But then there was one point where I was in AC Moore and I was looking around and they had this set of markers and they were their premier brand of markers, which were very much like the original Prismacolor markers. They had that tri chisel nib that I really liked on one end and then the bullet on the other end. They're a great marker. And they had them in a case, a marker case that was, I think it was manufactured by Crafter's Companion and bag. And the whole thing was like $50, I think. And I mean, just for the bag and the case was worth it, or just for the markers was worth it. So I couldn't resist it. But then the thing that really got me to pull the trigger and buy it, even though I didn't need any markers, was that I was like, I can show this in a haul video. And I found myself justifying my purchases, not that I could use this so many times, but I could use this in a haul video, that I was justifying my purchases that way. And that's when I realized this is insane. I need to stop. I'm being a bad example to the people that watch my channel. And I can't use all of this in my lifetime. Even when I'm teaching classes, am I going to be able to use all of this? And at that time, my kids were younger and I couldn't see where I was gonna be teaching people, in person full time for quite a few years. So I didn't wanna, like, stock up on a bunch of things that might go bad before then. And then, like, looking around in my craft space, I it was just chock a block. It was packed to the rafters. I had so much, and, so I ended up going through stuff, decluttering. I called up local schools if I had a large amount of something to make sure that the stuff could actually get used. I didn't want to dump a bunch of stuff at the school and have it not be practical because there wasn't enough of anything. I let my friends take what they wanted to take, and I pared down. And then I stopped doing haul videos because I knew that I could not. It wasn't sustainable, and it was setting a bad example for my viewers. And I was normalizing this culture of excess and just more, more, more. And it's so easy. I mean, when you see those value packs of gorgeous paper, do you know what I'm talking about? Michael's will have the hot buy ones. Joanne would have the die cuts with a view ones. AC Moore would have all the American Crafts ones. And it was so tempting because the designs were so cute. But when you bring home a pad of paper that's got like between 50 and 180 sheets, I think I even had one that was like 300 sheets. When you start bringing home those massive amounts of paper, you have to ask yourself, okay, how many sheets of paper do I use in a month? I don't use that many. I'm using like I might use a sheet of paper to make an envelope and then use the scraps to make a card to match it. But that's like, that takes me a couple hours to use that, to do that. And how many sheets of that paper can I use? I mean, I was using up paper making envelopes. I was decoupaging boxes. I was doing all sorts of home decor stuff, and still I wasn't making a dent in that paper. So I really had to kind of come to terms with what I could realistically produce with the supplies I was buying. And all of a sudden, a lot of those papers that I was calling precious, I kind of got over that. And I'm like, I need to use that. So, of course, other than that rusty pickle paper that is still like, I should just put that in a frame at this point because I don't know. I've been talking about this paper for like 15 years, 18 years. Um, it really helped me break that cycle of precious. But even then, like, I'll be go to do a tutorial and I'll go and grab a budget set of pencils because, oh, do I wanna use up any of my polychromos on this? Might not be precious enough. Maybe I'll just use these brute fooners, or I'll just use these Cezanne or whatever the popular budget pencil of the day is, because the longer I've had those polychromos for over 20 years, they barely look used, but they become precious. My Prismacolors aren't precious. I've used those down to nubs, and I've bought another set of them, and I've bought smaller sets to replace the ones that I've used up. For some reason, those aren't precious. I can use those and I have no problem. And I think part of the reason that my Prismacolor pencils aren't precious is because I got my first set when I was 5. My mother got me a set of 45 Prismacolor. Is it the 45 or 60? And I use those down to nubs, and then I would just buy the colors as I needed them. And then, oh, I would say it was probably in my early 20s, I bought the anniversary set of 144, which wasn't even 144 Prismacolor pencils. It was like probably 120 of the color pencils, and it had like some um Sanford design pencils, and it had, odds and ends. And then I used those up really well, and they were getting down to nubs, and I, again, replenished with open stock, and then I got the 150 set. And of course, Prismacolors have come down in price a lot over the years, but I use those. I grab those first because they're reliable, they're not precious. I know I can replace any of them for like a couple bucks, maybe even less if I'm buying in bulk. And but because I use them and I'm used to using them, they don't become precious. A lot of my Derwent sets are kind of precious because I never got in the habit of breaking them out and really using them and letting them get short and letting them get sharpened. So the best tonic for that is to grab that set of pencils and use them. I'm finding so much joy in seeing the pencils get shorter now because it's like, I know if I use it up, then I deserve to buy another one, and I'll feel good about purchasing that single pencil. So try it. It will be a little scary at first, but but trust me, you'll feel good when you start seeing the beautiful artwork and the beautiful crafts that you're creating with those pencils. So do you have a precious item? Do you have something that you just haven't been able to break into? Maybe it's a cut of fabric that you bought at a special fabric store. I actually only buy fabric when I have a specific project, unless they're fat quarters, because I don't feel bad using up fat quarters, and I can never anticipate what I'm gonna wanna make, so buying yard goods of fabric just doesn't make sense unless I have a project in mind. But let me know what your precious item is. You can leave a comment on my blog. You can leave a voice message on the podcast app. It's so fun to get the voicemail messages. Oh my gosh, because a lot of times I'll get a voicemail message from one of you guys, and I know your name from commenting on my YouTube channel or my blog, and then it's so fun to hear the voice to it, a voice to the face. I just love it. So I want to thank everyone that's left voicemail messages because it gives me a smile. Oh my gosh, I love hearing your friendly voices across the computer. It's just really nice. Um, but anyways, my challenge for you is to use those precious things, whether it's a set of watercolors that you've been hoarding, or paper, or a sketchbook. Breaking into a sketchbook. I know using that first page of the sketchbook, isn't that kind of scary? So what I recommend you do actually, because I have totally botched first pages of sketchbooks, and I've actually cut them out with like an X-Acto knife. I've cut out the first page before, and because I've like botched it. So go in a few pages and then start your sketchbook there, and then when you're feeling really inspired, then do that first page, because you'll kind of have broken the ice. I find that it's very freeing also. Like if I find a piece of paper when I'm cleaning and it maybe has a smudge on it, I find that very freeing to use, because it's like, oops, whatever I do is going to make this paper better because it's always a smudge on it. And the artist Moreau, who is known for his kind of abstract, fanciful, very colorful, graphic paintings, he would actually, when his wife would come home from grocery shopping, he would take the paper that the meat was wrapped in, and he would smear that on his canvas because he couldn't stand looking at the white canvas. He needed to have some dirt or smudge or something on it first in order for him to work, because it broke the ice. So if you find a grimy piece of, like, maybe it's a piece of Arch's watercolor paper and it got, I don't know, dropped on the floor and got a footprint on it, or it got some sort of like ink leak or smudge or something, go ahead and use it. You'll feel free and liberated to use that paper. Another way that I feel liberated to use something is if I've made a botched painting. Like, let's say I've done a watercolor and it did not go well and it was on good paper and I feel bad. What I will do is I will just put a layer of gouache on it, which is an opaque watercolor, and then I'll use it for pastel, and it's usually the best pastel surface ever to do that. So let that break the ice. There is no ruining your art supplies. There is no wasting your art supplies. The only art supplies that are wasted are the ones that go bad before you get a chance to use them, or the ones that never get used in your lifetime and just sit there on the shelf. So break that cycle of precious. You bought these goods to use them, so use them. You deserve to. I think that's another thing. Somebody said, I think a lot of times we feel like we don't deserve to use these things. Well, who the heck else deserves to use them? You worked hard for that money. You bought the supply. So use it. You deserve to. You earned it. You earned the money for it. You deserve to. It's not any, you are more precious than your supplies. And I want you to think of that when you're walking through your art room or your craft room, and or you're digging through your, maybe you have a tote of art supplies and you're digging through that tote of supplies and you're worried about using something up and wasting something. Well, what do you want to happen with those supplies? Do you want them to get lost in a move? Do you want them to um, dry up? Another way to break the cycle of precious, or if you're considering getting into art or craft and you're worried that this might happen to you, is to buy products that don't go bad. So some products have a really, really extended shelf life. As long as they're not damaged, they will last you forever pretty much. And that would be watercolor paints. Even if they dry in the tube, you can cut the tube off. And I've done that before. You can cut the tube off and you can put it in a palette. You can just put the chunk in a palette, or you can like break a chunk off of the watercolor chunk and you can put it in your palette, wet it down. It will work fine. There's no chemical change there. Another thing would be colored pencils. Some people said they've noticed their pencils drying out, not working as well, but I have never had that happen. And I mean, I still have some short barrel Prismacolors from back when I was 5 in the early 80s, and they work fine. So I've never encountered that. Maybe if you live in the desert that happens. I don't know, but in Maine, which is it's seasonal climate, I haven't had that issue even with like storing stuff in the basement. I have had some watercolor sticks crack before, but that's about it, like the woodless watercolor pencils, but not regular oil-based colored pencils. Um, and those will last you a long time. Oil paint actually lasts a really long time as long as it's capped up and the air has not left it. Things like acrylics and glues and stuff that is affected by temperature shifts, they tend to be shorter in shelf life. Tube acrylics will last a lot longer than bottled acrylics. Your cheap bottled craft acrylics will not last that long, a couple years maybe before they get kind of chunky. So go ahead and use those. I mean, plus they're inexpensive. You should experiment with them and use them up. Another thing that does not last long, which kind of was a kick in the teeth when I realized that I had a gallon of resin that went bad because it will just eventually harden on you. And it was a polyester resin, which I think has a shorter shelf life than the epoxy resin. But even epoxy resin will go bad. So if you bought some of that, use it up now. Use it up now. Like if you have bought resin and it's still in your possession, use it up because it only has like a 6 month to a year guaranteed shelf life. So there's also another reason not to hoard, not to buy humongous bottles because you think it's going to be cheaper in the long term. I have a friend who bought a gallon of Gorilla Glue thinking it'll be cheaper in the long term. I use this all the time and it hardened up. I either get the single serve Gorilla Glues or just the regular size bottle, just because I can't use up a regular size bottle before it'll eventually harden in the tube and be no good. So keep that in mind too. I also super glue. I buy the single serve super glues because even though like I hate all those containers, they I will waste less. For $1, you can usually get like 5 single serve super glues. And even though they're in their own little metal tubes, um, I waste less than if I buy a regular size plastic thing of super glue because it always goes bad after like 2 uses. And for the same price, or actually for less than the price, you can get a lot more use out of it. So you got to know how you craft. Obviously, if you're using super glue every day, that probably wouldn't make sense for you. But for someone who uses it to like secure a knot in something or to glue something plastic that has broken, it just makes sense for me. And I think you probably know how you use your supplies best. So if you're contemplating buying a budget set of pencils, and on your shelf you have a beautiful set of pencils by Derwent or Caran d'Ache or Prismacolor or um, Faber-Castell, consider rather than spending that $30, $25, whatever it is on the budget pencils that you're going to use until you get good enough to use those expensive pencils. Think about this. You got $30 to spend. Instead of buying the cheap pencils that you can practice with, why not practice with the good ones that are precious? And as you use up a pencil, take some money out of that $30 budget you have and buy another pencil. I think you will find that your money goes a lot further that way and your artwork is a lot nicer and your artwork has more longevity because the colors are less likely to fade if you're going with certain legacy brands. Not all, I mean, Prismacolors will fade. A lot of pencils are going to fade unless you're buying specific light fast colors. But the usability, the workability, I think in the long run, you're going to find that you save some money and you break the cycle of precious. Now, let me also tell you that I'm kind of a big hypocrite. I love trying out budget supplies because I love to find those diamonds in the rough. I love to find those gems because there's a place for those as well. But I think if you have those expensive supplies sitting on your shelf right now, getting the budget supplies is not the best choice for you. However, if you've got a 12-year-old that's really into art, but they're, burning through supplies like nobody's business, maybe they're taking them to school and there's a chance that they might get lost or stolen or dropped, then that's where the budget supplies are going to be a much better pick, like the Brute Funer squares or I mean, there's been some really decent budget pencils out there. The Arteza, um, the Mark Art, Nione, Deli, those are all great pencils for that sort of situation where maybe your kid is like taking them on the bus, or they're taking them to grandma's house, they're taking them to school, they're sharing them with their friends. A budget set would be um, much more useful there because if it does get lost, you're only out 30 bucks. If you're not sure if they really like color pencils, they're going to be able to use a good quality pencil that they can't get open stock for, but they can get an idea whether they like them or not, and then you can invest on the a more higher end pencil to stay at home for them to use at home and have the other ones for travel. And if you travel a lot and you don't want to risk bringing your precious pencils out, totally those would be a total good fit for you. So there's definitely a fit for everyone. I'm not going to put down any supplies, especially because I really love trying out those budget supplies and finding good ones. But I'm just saying that if you already have the precious supplies, use the precious supplies. Buying more budget supplies in the long run is going to cost you more money, and you'll probably be less satisfied with the work you're doing. And then those supplies sitting on your shelf, the legacy brands, the expensive ones, they're going to become more precious and less likely to ever be used. And you bought them to use them. And the it's so ironic that you're saving them for when you get good or for, when you feel like you've earned the right to use those things. By the time that happens, I mean, it may never happen. You may never feel good enough to use them, but you are good enough. The fact that you own them, you bought them, you had inspiration and you had dreams when you bought them, that means you should be using them. You earned the money for them, you bought them. Or maybe somebody gave them to you, and how are you honoring their gift if they gave you these expensive supplies and you're too afraid to use them? They want to see you use them. That's how they're getting their joy with giving you that gift because they knew you wanted them and they want to see you use them. So don't put them on a shelf. Don't put them on a shelf, guys. Use them up. That's why you have them. And it's not that expensive to maintain and it's not as expensive as you think to maintain a high quality set of watercolors or pencils because you're just buying as you use up, which takes a while, friend. It's not like rebuying all 24 colors again. It's buying one color. And especially online, you can get them very affordably. I keep a running list. Actually, what I do now is when I see a supply I'm almost out of, or when I run out of something, I write it on a Post-it note and I stick it on my bulletin board. So when I have a bunch of things, I will place an order, or when I need something immediately, then I'll go and I'll grab all those Post-it notes and I'll order all the things that I'm running low on so that I don't have to pay shipping. Because otherwise, I totally get hooked on that. Whole free shipping thing. And so if I didn't, I would just buy things I think are interesting and I'm curious about to get me up to that free shipping point. So, and a lot of times those items kind of turn into the precious things on the shelf that never get used. So that's a way that I curb the cycle of precious. And of course, using it. I've been busting out my M. Graham watercolors. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but if you watch my YouTube videos, you may. I've been busting out the M. Graham watercolors because they're my favorites. And since I've been doing YouTube, I've used them less. For one reason, the palette's really big, so it doesn't fit on my table as well when I'm shooting videos. Um, but it's like those are my favorites. Why aren't I using them instead of promoting all these other supplies that aren't my favorites? And my favorites are sitting on a shelf. That's kind of crazy. So really just look at your behavior, and it's okay to laugh at yourself a little bit. And end of the day, I just want to make sure you're using those good things that you purchased to use so they don't go to waste. You know, if this pandemic has taught me anything, is that I have enough. I have enough at home, and I should be using that and not looking for the next treat I can find at the art supply store. So anyway, I hope you found this podcast useful, informative, entertaining, or at least I hope it made your workout or your housework go a little bit faster. I want to thank you so much for watching. Please tell a friend if you enjoyed this podcast. And till next time, happy crafting. Bye now.